The scream tore through the canyon like a knife through silk, high, raw, and utterly alone. Ethan Cole jerked his horse to a halt, breath catching in his chest. He knew that sound. Every parent who'd ever lost a child knew it. The cry of the abandoned, the terrified, the dying. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle as the wind carried it again, weaker this time, from somewhere in the rocks below. For 3 years, he'd ridden these fence lines in silence, preferring the company of ghosts to the living. Now something in that voice called to the dead places inside him, and despite every instinct screaming to ride on, Ethan Cole turned his horse toward the sound. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Lila and Ethan's story travels. Now, let us begin. The Wyoming Territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a sky the color of old pewter. Ethan Cole had been riding fence lines since dawn, checking for breaks in the wire where cattle might wander into the ravines that scarred this high country like old wounds. The work was methodical, requiring just enough attention to keep darker thoughts at bay, but not so much that a man couldn't lose himself in the rhythm of leather creaking and hoofbeats against hard earth. He was a man constructed of sharp angles and hard edges now, all the soft places burned away by grief. At 34, silver already threaded through the dark hair at his temples, and lines bracketed his mouth, not from smiling, but from the constant effort of not breaking. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested easy on the reins, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats, measuring distances, calculating risk. It was how a man survived out here. It was how a man survived, period. The scream changed everything. It came from somewhere below the ridge, thin and desperate, and it hit Ethan like a physical blow. His horse, a steady roan gelding named Judge, shied sideways, ears pinned flat. Ethan's hand was already on his Winchester, levering around into the chamber before conscious thought caught up with instinct. "Easy," he murmured to the horse, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. "Easy now." He'd been alone so long that human voices had become foreign, almost threatening. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest settlement, people meant complications. They meant questions he didn't want to answer and connections he couldn't afford to make. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to ride on. Whatever was happening down in those rocks wasn't his concern. The cry came again, weaker, fading. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. 3 years ago, he'd made a promise to himself. No more. No more caring, no more hoping, no more letting anything matter enough to hurt. His daughter Sarah had been 5 years old when the fever took her, and 6 months later his wife Catherine had followed, not from sickness, but from the simple inability to survive Sarah's absence. He'd buried them both on the hill behind the house, under the cottonwood where Sarah used to play, and something essential inside him had gone into the ground with them. But that sound was a child's voice. "Damn it," Ethan whispered, and turned Judge toward the edge. The ravine dropped away sharply, all loose scree and jutting rock. No horse could navigate that descent. Ethan swung down, tied Judge to a scrub pine, and started down on foot, the Winchester cradled across his chest. His boots slipped on the loose stone, sending small cascades of pebbles skittering downward. The sound had stopped now, and that silence was somehow worse than the screaming. "Hello?" His voice came out rusty, unpracticed. "Anyone there?" Nothing. Just wind scouring the rocks and the distant cry of a hawk. He kept moving, working his way along a narrow ledge where ancient water had carved channels into the stone. His heart was doing something strange in his chest, something it hadn't done in years. It was hoping. And he hated himself for it. Then he saw her. She was wedged into a gap between two boulders, so small and still that at first he thought she might be dead. A child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dressed in what had once been a calico dress but was now little more than rags. Her feet were bare and bloody, her dark hair matted with dirt, and what might have been blood. But it was her face that stopped him cold. For one impossible, heart-stopping moment, he saw Sarah. The same delicate bone structure, the same wide-set eyes, the same small, stubborn chin. Ethan's vision blurred and his knees threatened to buckle. 3 years of carefully maintained control shattered like glass. Then she moved, just a flutter of eyelashes, and the spell broke. Not Sarah. Could never be Sarah. But close enough that looking at her felt like being stabbed. "Hey!" He kept his voice soft as he approached, rifle pointed away. "Hey there, little one. You hurt?" Her eyes snapped open. They were brown, not blue like Sarah's, and they held a wariness that no child's eyes should contain. She tried to scramble backward, but there was nowhere to go. "Easy, easy." Ethan set the Winchester down carefully and raised both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Ethan. What's yours?" She just stared at him, chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Now that he was closer, he could see the bruises. They mottled her arms in shades of purple and yellow, finger-shaped marks that made his stomach turn. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, and dried blood crusted beneath her nose. "Someone hurt you," Ethan said quietly. It wasn't a question. The girl's lower lip trembled. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. "Bad men." Those two words ignited something in Ethan's chest that he'd thought long dead. Rage. Pure, clean, and absolutely focused. "Where are they now? The bad men?" "Gone." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I ran. Mama said run, so I ran." "Where's your mama?" The girl's face crumpled, and Ethan knew the answer before she spoke. "The bad men shot her. She fell down and didn't get up." Tears tracked through the dirt on her cheeks. "She told me to run and hide and not come out for nobody. But it's been so long and I'm so hungry and—" Her voice broke into sobs. Ethan moved slowly, telegraphing every motion, and eased himself down to her level. Up close, he could see she was trembling, from fear, cold, or hunger, probably all three. Small bones pressed sharp against her skin. This child hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe longer. "What's your name?" he asked again. Lila. Lila. That's a pretty name." He shrugged out of his coat, the heavy sheepskin one that had been Catherine's last gift to him, and draped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her completely. "I need to look at your injuries, Lila. Make sure nothing's broken. That okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. Her trust, given so tentatively to a complete stranger, broke something in him. He examined her as gently as he could. Apart from the bruises and scrapes, there didn't seem to be anything serious. No broken bones, no deep wounds. But she was severely dehydrated and probably suffering from exposure. The nights in this high country could kill, even in late summer. "When did you last eat?" "Don't know. Long time." Ethan pulled his canteen from his belt. "Small sips now, not too fast." She grabbed for it with desperate hands, and he had to physically stop her from gulping. "Easy, easy. I know you're thirsty, but you'll make yourself sick. Small sips." She obeyed, those enormous brown eyes never leaving his face, as if trying to determine whether he was another bad man or something different, something safe. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so." "Good, because we need to get you out of here before dark, and my horse is up on the ridge." He paused. "Lila, those men who hurt your mama, do you know what they wanted?" Her whole body went rigid. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Me. They wanted me." Ice slithered down Ethan's spine. "Why?" "Mama said, she said a bad man bought me. Gave her money when I was born. She took the money 'cause we needed it, but then she kept me anyway. Loved me too much to let go. The bad man got tired of waiting." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He sent men to collect his property." Property. They'd called this child property. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He had to close his eyes for a moment, had to breathe through the fury that threatened to consume all rational thought. When he opened them again, Lila was watching him with that too-old expression, waiting to see what he would do with her truth. "You're not property," he said, each word clear and firm. "You're a child, a person, and nobody owns you. You understand me?" Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the fragile beginning of it. "Will you take me somewhere safe?" she whispered. Every instinct Ethan possessed screamed at him to say no, to take her to the nearest town, leave her with the marshal or the preacher or anyone else who could shoulder this burden. He learned the hard way that caring led to losing, and losing led to the kind of pain that hollowed you out until you were nothing but a shell pretending to be a man. But he looked at this small, broken child wearing his dead wife's coat and heard himself say, yes. Getting Lila up the ravine proved harder than coming down. She was weak, stumbling every few steps, and finally Ethan just picked her up. She weighed almost nothing, all bird bones and sharp angles, and that lightness terrified him. He'd carried Sarah like this, that last day, rushing toward town and the doctor, knowing even as he ran that it was too late, that the fever had already won. He forced the memory down and focused on the present, one foot in front of the other. Don't think, just move. Judge snorted when they appeared, but didn't shy when Ethan lifted Lila into the saddle. The girl clung to the pommel with white knuckles. You ever ridden a horse before? Ethan asked. She shook her head. Well, Judge here is about the gentlest creature you'll ever meet. He won't let you fall. Ethan swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to hold her steady. She stiffened at the contact, but didn't pull away. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours, and Lila barely spoke. She swayed in the saddle, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, and eventually her head lolled back against Ethan's chest. He could feel each breath she took, shallow and quick. And the fragile trust in that gesture terrified him more than any gunfight ever had. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. It wasn't much, a small house, a barn, a few outbuildings, but Ethan had built most of it with his own hands. After Catherine died, he'd let things slide. The fence needed mending, the barn roof leaked, and the vegetable garden had gone to seed. But it was still standing, still functioning, still his. He'd never thought about seeing it through a child's eyes until now. Is this your home? Lila asked, the first word she'd spoken in miles. Yes. It's nice? The simple comment shouldn't have affected him, but it did. When had anyone last called his home nice? When had anyone last been here at all? He dismounted and lifted her down. Her legs nearly buckled, and he caught her before she fell. Let's get you inside. Get some food in you. The house was dark and cold. Ethan hadn't bothered with a fire the night before, hadn't bothered with much of anything beyond basic survival. Now, seeing the dusty furniture and bare floors through Lila's eyes, he felt a flush of something like shame. Sit, he said, gesturing to one of the chairs at the kitchen table. I'll get the stove going. She obeyed, but he noticed how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, eyes on the door, already learning how to survive, already calculating escape routes. It gutted him. He built up the fire with practiced efficiency, then rummaged through his supplies. Dried beef, beans, some potatoes going soft in the bin. Not much, but enough. He put on a pot of coffee for himself and heated some broth for Lila. Her stomach couldn't handle anything heavy after days of starvation. While the food warmed, he wet a cloth and brought it to her. Let's clean you up a bit. She flinched when he touched her face but held still as he wiped away the dirt and dried blood. Beneath the grime, she was delicate-featured and pale, with a scattering of freckles across her nose. Not Sarah, but enough like her that Ethan's heart ached with every breath. Tell me about your mama, he said quietly. What was her name? Rose? Lila's voice was small. Rose Tanner. She used to sing. Pretty songs about birds and rivers and places far away. She said someday we'd go somewhere nobody knew us, somewhere we could be safe. Where were you living? Lots of places. We moved around. Mama said the bad man was always looking, so we couldn't stay nowhere long. She picked at the hem of her ragged dress. Last place was a tent camp near a mining town. Mama washed clothes for the miners. That's where they found us. How many men? 3. One of them had a paper. He showed it to Mama and she started crying. Said I was his, that he'd paid for me and now he was collecting. Mama told him no. She told him she'd never let him take me. Lila's voice cracked. He shot her. Just shot her. She fell down and told me to run, so I did. Ran and ran until I couldn't run no more. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard he heard his teeth grind. This paper, did you see what it said? Mama called it a contract, said the bad man's name was on it. Mr. Garrett Holloway. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but he filed it away. A man who bought children like livestock had a reckoning coming, and Ethan intended to be the one who delivered it. The broth was ready. He poured it into a bowl and set it in front of Lila with a spoon. "Slowly," he warned. "Your stomach's not used to food right now." She ate like she might never eat again, despite his warnings, and kept it down only through sheer will. When she finished, she slumped in the chair, eyes already closing. "You need sleep," Ethan said. "Real sleep, in a real bed." He led her to Sarah's room. He'd kept the door closed for 3 years, unable to face the cheerful yellow curtains and the rag doll still sitting on the pillow. Now he opened it, and dust motes danced in the lamplight. Everything was exactly as Sarah had left it. The books on the shelf, the drawings pinned to the wall, the small rocking chair in the corner. Lila's eyes went wide. This is for me? For tonight, at least. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." She climbed into the bed, so small she barely made a dent in the mattress, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. It was the same quilt Catherine had stitched during her pregnancy, a log cabin pattern in shades of blue and cream. Ethan had to look away. "Mr. Ethan?" Lila's voice was barely audible. Just Ethan. "Ethan, you won't leave while I'm sleeping, will you? Won't let the bad men take me?" The question drove a stake through his chest. This child who'd lost everything was trusting him with her safety, trusting him not to fail her the way he'd failed Sarah. "I'll be right outside," he promised, "and I'm a light sleeper. Nobody's taking you anywhere." She nodded, eyelids already drooping. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her. She looked impossibly small in Sarah's bed, impossibly fragile, and impossibly dangerous to his carefully maintained defenses. He should take her to town in the morning. Hand her over to Marshal Tate or Reverend Michaels. Let someone else handle this. Someone who hadn't already lost everything that mattered. Someone who still had the capacity to care without it destroying them. But even as the thoughts formed, he knew he wouldn't do it, couldn't do it. He pulled the door mostly closed, leaving it cracked enough that he'd hear if she called out, and retreated to the kitchen. The coffee had gone bitter on the stove, but he drank it anyway, standing at the window and staring out at the darkening land. 3 years. 3 years of careful isolation, of deliberately not feeling, of surviving each day by refusing to let anything matter. And in one afternoon, one terrified child had shattered it all. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen with his rifle across his knees, listening to the house settle around him and the wind prowl past the windows. Every sound made his hand tighten on the gun. Every creak of wood made his heart rate spike. If Lila was telling the truth, and he had no reason to doubt her, then men were looking for her, men who'd already killed her mother, men who considered her property to be collected, not a human being to be protected, men who would eventually track her here. The smart move would be to run. Pack up before dawn, take Lila, and head for one of the larger towns where a marshal might actually have the authority and manpower to stand against whoever this Garrett Holloway was. Disappear into the anonymity of crowds and distance. But running meant abandoning everything Ethan had left. This ranch, these 4 walls, this land he'd worked until his hands bled. It was all that remained of the life he'd built with Catherine, his last connection to Sarah. If he left their graves behind, their memory, their existence. He couldn't do it. Which meant when those men came, and they would come, he'd have to make his stand here. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it brought a strange kind of clarity. For 3 years, he'd been waiting to die. Not actively seeking it, but not avoiding it either. Just drifting through each day with the numb acceptance of a man who'd already lost everything worth living for. Now, suddenly, he had something to protect again. Someone who needed him to be more than a ghost in his own life. The irony didn't escape him. He'd tried so hard to avoid caring, to avoid connection, to avoid the inevitable pain of loss. And the universe had dropped a child on his doorstep who looked like his daughter and needed saving. "Damn it," he whispered to the darkness. But he didn't move from his post. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun struggling to burn through a layer of high clouds. Ethan had just started fresh coffee when he heard the soft pad of bare feet behind him. Lila stood in the doorway, wearing the same ragged dress, her hair a wild tangle. She looked rested, though. The exhaustion lines had smoothed from her young face, and her eyes were clearer. "Morning," Ethan said. "You hungry?" She nodded, still wary, still watching him like he might transform into something dangerous at any moment. He scrambled eggs and fried salt pork, and Lila ate slowly this time, her stomach adjusting to food again. She kept glancing at him between bites, and finally she spoke. "You gonna take me to town? Give me to the law?" Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Do you want me to?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. "They'll just give me to him, to Mr. Holloway. He's got papers that say I'm his." "Papers can be wrong." "But they're papers. Grown-ups care about papers more than they care about what's right." The bitter wisdom in that statement from a child so young made Ethan's chest ache. She'd learned too much, too fast, about how the world worked, about how little protection the law offered to the powerless. "I need you to understand something, Lila." He leaned forward, making sure she was looking at him. "I'm not a lawman, I'm not a hero, I'm just a man with a ranch and a rifle. But while you're under my roof, you're under my protection. That means nobody takes you anywhere you don't want to go, not without going through me first." Her eyes searched his face. "You promise?" "I promise." It was a fool's promise, he knew. A promise that might get him killed. But looking at this small, terrified child, he couldn't make any other. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because you look like my daughter. Because I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you. Because for 3 years I've been dead inside and you're the first thing that's made me feel alive again, and that terrifies me more than any gunfight ever could." But he couldn't say any of that. So instead he said, "Because it's the right thing to do." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." They finished breakfast in silence. Ethan was washing the dishes when he heard it, the distant drum of hoofbeats. His blood went cold. "Lila." He kept his voice calm, controlled. "Go to your room, get under the bed. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Her face went white. "The bad men?" Maybe just travelers, but until I know." She was already moving, disappearing down the hall. Ethan heard the door close, then silence. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. 3 riders were coming up the road, moving at a steady canter. Even at this distance, Ethan could tell they weren't locals. Their horses were too fine, their clothes too tailored. These were men with money and purpose. His hands tightened on the Winchester. They pulled up in front of the house, dismounting with the casual confidence of men who expected no real opposition. The one in the lead was tall and broad-shouldered, with a carefully trimmed beard and eyes like chips of flint. He wore a long coat despite the warming day, and Ethan would bet his ranch there were guns beneath it. "Ethan Cole," the man called out. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled loosely but ready. "That's right, state your business." "My name is Dixon, Thomas Dixon. I work for a Mr. Garrett Holloway, and we're looking for a child, a girl, about 7 years old. We have reason to believe she might be in this area." "That's so." "Indeed." Dixon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Her mother absconded with her some years back, and Mr. Holloway has been searching for her ever since. He has legal documentation establishing his claim. The girl is valuable to him." "Valuable how?" "That's Mr. Holloway's business." Dixon's tone hardened. "Have you seen such a child?" Every instinct told Ethan to lie. To say no, he hadn't seen anything, send these men on their way. But that wouldn't end it. They'd search the area, ask questions in town, eventually piece together the truth. Better to know what he was facing now. "Maybe," Ethan said carefully. "What's she to you?" "I told you. Mr. Holloway's property, legally purchased. We've been tracking her for weeks, and the trail leads here." Dixon took a step forward. "We don't want any trouble, Mr. Cole. Just hand over the girl and we'll be on our way." "And if I don't?" The other 2 men shifted, hands drifting toward their guns. Dixon's smile widened. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to insist." The moment crystallized, sharp and clear. Ethan could feel the weight of the rifle in his hands, could calculate the distances, the angles, the odds. 3 against 1, but he had cover and they didn't. He was on his own land, knew every inch of it. They were strangers, overconfident and underestimating him. He could take them. But if he did, There would be no going back. He'd be declaring war on whoever this Garrett Holloway was, and men like that, men with money and lawyers and hired guns, didn't forgive. They crushed. But if he gave Lila up, he thought of her face when she'd asked him not to leave while she slept, the trust in her eyes when he'd promised to protect her, the way she'd eaten breakfast like it might be her last meal, because it might be. No, Ethan said. Dixon's expression didn't change, but something cold slithered behind his eyes. Excuse me? I said no, the child stays with me. Mr. Cole, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. Ethan's voice was quiet, steady. You've got papers that say she's property. I've got a Winchester that says she's a human being. We're at an impasse. One of the other men, a wiry fellow with pockmarked skin, laughed. You're threatening us? I'm stating a fact. Girl's under my protection now. You want her, you'll have to go through me. Dixon studied him for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly, almost regretfully. That's a shame, Mr. Cole. I really hoped you'd be reasonable. Reasonable went out the window when you called a child property. Mr. Holloway won't be pleased. Mr. Holloway can take it up with me personally. Until then, get off my land. The three men exchanged glances. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought they might push it, might force the issue here and now. His finger moved closer to the trigger. Then Dixon smiled again, cold and predatory. Very well, but this isn't over, Mr. Cole, not by a long shot. We'll be back, and next time we won't ask nicely. They mounted up, turning their horses with deliberate slowness, making it clear they weren't afraid, weren't backing down, just postponing. Ethan kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hands were shaking. Lila, he called. They're gone. She emerged from the house, pale and trembling. Did you tell them to leave? I did. They'll come back. Probably. She wrapped her arms around herself. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let you get involved. Now they'll hurt you too. Hey. Ethan knelt down to her level. Look at me. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. You understand? Tears streamed down her cheeks. But no buts. Those men made their choices. I made mine, and I'm not sorry for it. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Ethan froze, every muscle locked, unused to such contact after years of isolation. Then, slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her and held on. We'll figure this out, he murmured into her hair. I promise. We'll figure it out. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Dixon would be back, and next time he'd bring more men with guns and no conscience. This ranch was defensible, but not against a small army. And Garrett Holloway, whoever he was, clearly had the resources to mount a small army. Ethan had just painted a target on both their backs, and he'd never felt more alive. The afternoon sun had shifted west by the time Lila finally stopped crying. She sat at the kitchen table, her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm milk, eyes red and swollen, but no longer leaking tears. Ethan stood at the window, watching the ridge where Dixon and his men had disappeared, his rifle still within easy reach. They'll bring more, Lila said quietly. Mr. Holloway always sends more when the first ones don't work. Ethan turned to look at her. You've seen this before? 3 times. Different towns, different places. Mama would hear they were coming, and we'd run in the middle of the night, leave everything behind. She stared into her milk. But we can't run forever. That's what Mama said, right before they found us. Your Mama was smart and brave. Ethan moved to the table, settling into the chair across from her. Tell me everything you know about Garrett Holloway. Where he lives, what he does, why he wants you so badly. Lila's face tightened with concentration. Mama didn't talk about him much, made her too sad. But I heard things. He's rich, lives in Denver, owns mines and railroads and lots of land. Mama said he collects things, beautiful things, rare things. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said he wanted to collect me because I was going to be beautiful when I grew up. That's what the contract said. He paid for me before I was even born, paid for Mama to eat good food and stay healthy so I'd be perfect. The words settled like poison in the air between them. Ethan felt his stomach churn with revulsion. This wasn't about labor or servitude. This was something far darker, far more twisted. A man who bought children like art pieces, planning their futures before they could speak. Did your mama sign this contract willingly? She was starving. I heard her tell someone once she was pregnant and alone and had no money. Mr. Holloway's man found her in a mining camp and offered her a way out. $500. All she had to do was give up the baby when it was born. Lila's hands tightened around the cup. But when I came, she couldn't do it. She took the money and ran. Been running ever since. $500. A fortune to a desperate woman. Barely anything to a man like Holloway. Which meant this wasn't about the money at all. This was about power, about possession, about a man who didn't accept being told no. How did they keep finding you? Mama said Mr. Holloway had connections everywhere. Lawmen, bankers, railroad agents. Someone would always recognize her eventually, or I'd be seen, and word would get back. We tried to stay small, stay hidden, but she shrugged helplessly. You can't hide forever. Ethan's mind was already working through the implications. If Holloway had that kind of reach, that kind of network, then Ethan taking Lila to the local marshal would do no good. The man might be honest, might try to help, but the moment word got out that the girl was in custody, Holloway would have lawyers and judges descending like vultures. And apparently, he had legal documentation, a contract signed by Lila's mother. That alone might be enough to sway a court, regardless of the moral bankruptcy of the arrangement. The paper Dixon mentioned, Ethan said. Did you ever see it? Once. Mama showed me when I was littler, told me I had to know what we were running from. It had both their names on it, Mama's and his. Big fancy signatures, and at the bottom it said something about… She screwed up her face, trying to remember. About legal transfer of custody upon birth. About how the child, me, would belong to Mr. Garrett Holloway in perpetuity. Mama said that meant forever. Who witnessed it? I don't know. There were other names, but I was too young to read them good. Ethan stood and began to pace. The legal angle was problematic, but not insurmountable. Contracts could be challenged, especially ones that treated human beings as commodities. But that would require lawyers, time, and money, none of which Ethan possessed in abundance. And it would require keeping Lila safe while the legal battle played out, which meant keeping her hidden from men who'd already killed for her. We need help, he said finally. Someone who can fight this legally while we keep you protected physically. Who would help? Good question. Ethan had deliberately isolated himself after Catherine's death, cutting ties with neighbors, avoiding town except when absolutely necessary. He had no friends to call on, no allies to turn to. Just himself and a rifle and a ranch that suddenly felt very small and very exposed. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'll figure it out. Lila studied him with those two old eyes. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Mom always said men only cared about two things, money and power. Said that's why Mr. Holloway wanted me and why nobody would help us even when they knew it was wrong. But you, she tilted her head. You don't seem like you care about money at all. I don't. Then why are you helping me? Because you remind me of my daughter, because I failed her, and maybe I can make up for it by saving you, because somewhere in these 3 years of numbness, I forgot how to be human, and you're reminding me what it feels like. Because it's right, he said instead. She nodded slowly, accepting the answer even if it wasn't complete. What do we do now? Now we prepare. If they're coming back, and they are, we need to be ready. He spent the rest of the afternoon securing the ranch. He moved ammunition to strategic locations around the house, checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and positioned lanterns where they could illuminate the approaches after dark. The barn was too exposed to use as a refuge, but the root cellar might work as a last resort. Thick walls, one narrow entrance, defensible if things went truly bad. Lila followed him from task to task, silent but attentive, absorbing everything. When he showed her how to load the old Colt revolver that had been Catherine's, just in case, though he prayed she'd never need it, she handled the weapon with careful respect. Mama taught me to shoot, she said. Just a little. She said a woman needed to know how to protect herself. Your mama was a wise woman. She was scared all the time. I could tell, even when she tried to hide it. Every knock on the door, every stranger who looked too long, she'd get this look in her eyes like a rabbit about to run. Lila set the revolver down carefully. I don't want to be scared like that forever. You won't be. How do you know? Because I won't let you be. It was another promise he had no right to make, another weight added to the already crushing burden of responsibility. But looking at her face, still bruised, still too thin, still marked by everything she'd endured, he couldn't regret it. They ate dinner as the sun set, a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Ethan was acutely aware of every sound beyond the walls, the wind in the eaves, the creak of the barn door, the distant cry of a coyote. Normal sounds, but charged with new meaning now. Any one of them could mask the approach of riders. Tell me about your daughter, Lila said suddenly. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? Your daughter. I saw the room, the yellow curtains, the doll, the drawings on the wall. That wasn't for guests. She met his eyes. I look like her, don't I? That's why you looked so strange when you first saw me. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The grief rose up like a physical thing, choking him. He wanted to deflect, to change the subject, to retreat behind the walls he'd spent 3 years building. But Lila had been honest with him, had trusted him with her darkest truths. She deserved the same in return. Her name was Sarah, he said quietly. She was 5 when she died. Fever took her in the winter 3 years ago. My wife Catherine followed 6 months later. Heart just gave out. Or maybe she just didn't want to live in a world without Sarah in it. He set down his fork, appetite gone. You do look like her. Same face shape, same stubborn chin. When I first saw you for just a second, I thought... His voice cracked. I thought maybe I'd gone crazy. That grief had finally broken something in my brain. I'm sorry, Lila whispered. Not your fault. Does it hurt, looking at me? Ethan considered lying, then, yes, but not in a bad way. More like remembering something precious you'd tried to forget because remembering hurt too much. You make me remember what it felt like to have someone to protect, someone to care about. Is that why you're helping me? Because I remind you of her? Partly, but also because you're you. Because you've been brave and strong and you deserve better than what life's dealt you so far. He leaned back in his chair. Sarah would have liked you. She was fierce, just like you. Stubborn as a mule and twice as determined. Used to tell me she was going to be a sheriff when she grew up, catch all the bad guys and make them sorry. A ghost of a smile touched Lila's lips. Did she play with the doll, the one on the bed? Every day. Her grandmother, my mother, made it for her first birthday. Sarah named it Margaret, after some character in a story Catherine used to read to her. She'd carry that doll everywhere, have tea parties in the yard, tuck it in at night like it was real. The memories flowed now, painful but oddly cleansing. The last thing she did before the fever got too bad was ask me to take care of Margaret when she was gone. Made me promise. Did you? I kept the doll on her bed, kept everything exactly the way she left it. Couldn't bear to change anything. Like if I did, she'd be truly gone. He shook his head. Probably sounds foolish. No, Lila said firmly. It sounds like love. The simple statement hit him harder than any rifle shot. He'd spent 3 years telling himself he'd moved on, that he'd accepted the loss, that he'd made peace with it. But the truth was, he'd just frozen everything, his grief, his love, his ability to feel anything at all, and pretended that numbness was healing. You can play with the doll if you want, he heard himself say. Sarah would have wanted someone to love it. Lila's eyes widened. Really? Really? She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her whole face, and Ethan felt something crack in his chest. The carefully maintained ice around his heart, the protective barrier that had kept him safe from feeling, was fracturing. And instead of terror, he felt something close to relief. They cleaned up dinner together, Lila standing on a chair to reach the wash basin, chattering about a cat she'd once had in one of the mining camps. The normalcy of it, the simple domesticity, was both comforting and unsettling. For 3 years, this house had been a tomb. Now it was slowly coming back to life. Night fell hard and complete, the moon just a sliver behind clouds. Ethan lit lamps and positioned them carefully, enough light to see by, not enough to make them visible from outside. He checked the rifle again, checked the revolver, checked the ammunition. Everything was ready, or as ready as it could be. "You should sleep," he told Lila. "I'll keep watch." "Will they come tonight?" "I don't know, but I'll be ready if they do." She hesitated at the door to her room. "Ethan, thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," he said. "Now get some rest." But sleep didn't come easily for either of them. Ethan heard her tossing and turning, heard her muffled sobs into the pillow. Twice he almost went to her but held back. She needed to process her grief, her fear, her loss. He couldn't shield her from all of it, much as he wanted to. Around midnight, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, the rag doll clutched in her arms. "Can't sleep," she admitted. "Me either." She settled into the chair beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the darkness beyond the windows. After a while, she leaned against his shoulder, and he didn't pull away. "Will you tell me about the ranch?" she asked. "How you built it?" So he did. He told her about coming to Wyoming Territory as a young man with nothing but determination and dreams. About meeting Catherine at a church social and knowing within 5 minutes he'd marry her. About building the house board by board, the barn beam by beam. About Sarah's birth, the terror and joy of holding that tiny life for the first time. About drought years and good years, cattle drives and winter storms, the slow accumulation of a life worth living. Lila listened without interrupting, her breathing gradually evening out. When he looked down, her eyes were closed, her face peaceful in sleep. Carefully, moving slowly so as not to wake her, Ethan lifted her and carried her back to bed. She stirred slightly as he tucked the quilt around her. "Papa?" she mumbled, still mostly asleep. The words stopped Ethan cold. Then he realized she was dreaming, probably of her own father, whoever that might have been. She'd never mentioned him, and Ethan had never asked. "Sleep now," he whispered, and slipped out of the room. But the word echoed in his mind. Papa. Such a simple thing, yet weighted with meaning he'd thought lost forever. Catherine used to call him that. "Papa's home," she'd tell Sarah when he came in from the fields. And Sarah would shriek with delight and run to him, heedless of his dirty boots and dust-covered clothes. He'd thought those days were gone forever, that he'd never hear that word again, never have anyone to be Papa for. Now this broken child slept in his daughter's bed, and the possibility of healing, of living again instead of just surviving, seemed almost within reach. The attack came an hour before dawn. Ethan was dozing in his chair, rifle across his lap, when Judge's whinny of alarm jolted him awake. He was on his feet instantly, heart hammering, every sense sharp. Riders, multiple horses, coming fast. "Lila!" He ran to her room, shook her awake. "We've got company! Root cellar now!" She was up and moving immediately, no questions, reaching for the revolver he'd left on her nightstand. They ran through the house, Ethan pausing only to grab the ammunition bag. The root cellar entrance was in the kitchen floor, a heavy wooden door that lifted on iron hinges. "Get down there," he ordered. "No matter what happens, you stay hidden. You hear shooting, you keep your head down. You hear my voice telling you to come out, you make damn sure it's really me before you move. Understand?" Her eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. Now go." She climbed down the ladder. Ethan lowered the door and threw the rug over it, knowing it wouldn't fool anyone for long, but hoping it might buy precious seconds. Then he moved to the window. 6 riders this time. Dixon was in the lead again, but the others were different men, harder looking, better armed. Professional guns, Ethan realized with a sinking feeling, the kind who killed for money and slept just fine afterward. They spread out as they approached, surrounding the house in a loose perimeter. Smart, tactical. These weren't amateurs. Dixon dismounted and walked toward the porch, hands visible but close to his guns. "Mr. Cole, we need to talk." Ethan positioned himself behind the doorframe, rifle trained on Dixon's chest. "Already had this conversation yesterday. Circumstances have changed. Mr. Holloway is offering you compensation for your trouble. $5,000. More money than you'll see in 10 years of ranching. All you have to do is hand over the girl." 5,000. For a moment, Ethan's mind reeled. That was enough to expand the ranch, buy breeding stock, secure his future. That was enough to matter. Then he thought of Lila's face when she'd asked him not to leave while she slept. Thought of her calling him Papa in her dreams. "Not interested," he called back. "Mr. Cole, please be reasonable. You're one man against 6. This doesn't have to end badly." "Then leave." Dixon's expression hardened. "I can't do that." "Then I guess we've got a problem." For a heartbeat, everything was still. Ethan could see Dixon calculating odds, weighing options. Then the man stepped backward, toward his horse. "Last chance, Cole." "Same to you." Dixon nodded slowly. Then he moved, diving for cover as his hand went for his gun. The world exploded into violence. Ethan fired first, the Winchester's report deafening in the pre-dawn quiet. His shot took Dixon in the shoulder, spinning him around. Then the others opened up, and bullets ripped through the walls like paper. Ethan dropped behind the heavy oak table, returning fire through the window. One rider screamed and fell. Another's horse reared, throwing its rider. But there were still 4 of them, and only one of him. Glass shattered, wood splintered, the house filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of powder. Ethan worked the lever action mechanically, firing, ducking, moving to a new position. He caught one man in the leg as he tried to rush the door, dropped another with a shot to the chest. But they were closing in, and he was running low on ammunition. A voice shouted from outside, "Burn him out!" Ethan's blood turned to ice. If they set fire to the house, Lila would be trapped in the cellar. She'd suffocate or burn alive while he fought. He had to end this now. He grabbed the revolver from his belt and the last handful of rifle cartridges. Then he did something crazy. He kicked open the front door and charged out, firing both guns. The surprise bought him seconds. He got one man between the eyes before the others could react. Another took a bullet to the gut and went down screaming. That left 2, Dixon bleeding but still dangerous, and another hard-faced gunman reaching for his rifle. Ethan's Winchester clicked empty. He dropped it and focused on the revolver, but Dixon was faster. His shot caught Ethan in the side, a burning line of agony that nearly dropped him. But Ethan kept moving, kept firing. The last gunman fell. Dixon's gun misfired, the hammer clicking on a bad round. Ethan's final bullet took him in the chest. Then silence. Ringing, terrible silence. Ethan stood in his yard, surrounded by bodies, blood running hot down his side. 6 men. He'd killed 6 men. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the porch railing, gasping, the world spinning. The pain in his side was spreading, hot and insistent. When he looked down, his shirt was soaked red. "Ethan!" Lila's voice. She was climbing out of the cellar, the revolver still clutched in her small hands. Her face went white when she saw him. "You're hurt." "I'm okay," he lied, though he could feel blood pooling in his boot. "Check them, make sure they're all down." She moved from body to body with a wariness that broke his heart. So young, yet already so familiar with death. After a moment, she called back. "They're dead, all of them, except him." Dixon. He was still breathing, barely, blood bubbling from his chest with each rattling gasp. Ethan limped over and knelt beside him. "Tell Holloway," Ethan said quietly, "that if he sends anyone else, I'll kill them too. Tell him the girl is mine now. Tell him to let her go." Dixon coughed, red staining his lips. "He'll never stop. You don't know what she means to him." "What does she mean?" But Dixon's eyes glazed over, his last breath rattling out before he could answer. Ethan swayed, the blood loss catching up with him. He felt Lila's small hands gripping his arm. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Get you inside." "Smart girl," he mumbled, and let her guide him back to the house. She worked with a competence born of necessity, fetching water and clean cloth, tearing strips from a sheet to bind his wound. The bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs, but hadn't penetrated deep, painful and bleeding like hell, but not fatal if they kept it clean. "Mama taught me," Lila explained as she worked. "We couldn't always get to doctors, so she showed me how to patch things up." "Good, Mama," Ethan managed through gritted teeth. She finished binding the wound and stepped back, her hands shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. What do we do about them? She gestured toward the yard, toward the bodies. We bury them. Then we get the hell out of here. Run? Yeah. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion crushing down on him. Dixon was right about one thing. Holloway won't stop. He'll send more men, better men, until either we're dead or he gets what he wants. We can't fight an army. Where will we go? I don't know yet. Somewhere far. Somewhere with law that might actually help. He closed his eyes. But first we rest. Then we bury the dead. Then we ride. Lila settled beside him, her small body pressed against his uninjured side. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you had to kill for me. I'm not, Ethan said, and meant it. Not one bit. Because somewhere in the violence, in the desperate fight for this child's life, he'd found something he'd lost 3 years ago. Purpose. Meaning. A reason to keep breathing that went beyond simple, stubborn survival. He'd found himself again, and he'd be damned if he let anyone take that away. Outside, dawn broke cold and gray over a yard filled with dead men. And inside, 2 broken people held on to each other and refused to let go. They buried the 6 men as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the blood-stained yard. Ethan's side screamed with every shovelful of earth, but he refused to let Lila see how much pain he was in. She stood nearby, holding Judge's reins, watching the horizon with those wary eyes that had seen too much. The graves were shallow. Ethan didn't have the strength or time for anything deeper. He marked each one with a simple wooden cross fashioned from barn planks, not out of respect but out of the practical need to remember where he'd buried them. The ground here was his, and he needed to know what lay beneath it. Dixon went in last. Ethan stood over the grave for a moment, leaning on the shovel, studying the man's lifeless face. In death, he looked almost ordinary, weathered and middle-aged, someone you might pass on any street without a second glance. But he'd come here to take a child, and he'd been willing to burn them alive to do it. What did he mean? Lila asked quietly. When he said I meant something special to Mr. Holloway? I don't know. Ethan drove the last cross into the earth with more force than necessary. But we're going to find out. They worked quickly after that, gathering what they could carry. Ethan filled saddlebags with ammunition, dried food, and medical supplies. Lila packed a small bundle of clothes, her ragged dress, and one of Sarah's simpler ones that Ethan had altered to fit her. She hesitated over the rag doll, then carefully tucked it into her bundle. Sarah would want you to have it, Ethan said when he noticed. I'll take good care of Margaret. I know you will. He saddled Judge and one of the dead men's horses, a sturdy mare with good lines and steady nerves. The other horses he turned loose. Let them find their way to someone who needed them, or go wild. Either way, they'd fare better than their former owners. The hardest part was the house. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the space he and Catherine had built together. The kitchen table where they'd shared 1,000 meals, the rocking chair where she'd nursed Sarah, the bedroom where they'd whispered dreams to each other in the dark. 3 years ago, leaving would have been impossible. This house was all he had left of them, the only physical evidence that his family had existed at all. But now, with Lila waiting outside and Holloway's shadow hanging over them both, Ethan understood something fundamental. A house was just wood and nails. What mattered, what had always mattered, was the people inside it, and Sarah and Catherine were gone. But Lila was here, alive, needing him. He touched the doorframe once, a silent farewell, then walked away without looking back. They rode hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and the ranch. Ethan pushed the pace despite the fire in his side, knowing that Holloway's men might come looking when Dixon's crew failed to report. They needed to be far away before that happened. Lila rode well for someone with little experience, keeping the mare steady and following Ethan's lead without complaint. She'd tied her bundle to the saddle and kept one hand near the revolver at her waist. Already learning to be ready, to be watchful, to survive. It broke his heart and filled him with fierce pride in equal measure. They stopped near midday at a creek to water the horses and rest. Ethan's wound had started bleeding again, soaking through the bandages. Lila noticed immediately. You need proper doctoring, she said, her voice tight with worry. I need to keep you safe. Doctoring can wait. Not if you bleed out. Then I'll be alone and Mr. Holloway will get me anyway. She crossed her arms, stubborn. We have to find help. Ethan wanted to argue, but the dizzy spells that had plagued him all morning suggested she was right. He was losing too much blood and infection was a real risk out here. They needed supplies, proper bandages, maybe even a doctor, which meant they needed a town. There's a settlement about 20 miles east, he said finally. Pine Ridge. Small place, but they've got a trading post and usually a circuit doctor passes through. We can risk it for supplies, but we can't stay long. Will they know about me? About Mr. Holloway looking? Probably not yet. News travels slow out here, and we're pretty far from the main routes. He adjusted his position, trying to ease the pressure on his ribs. But we'll need to be careful. No using real names, no drawing attention. They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The land here was different from Ethan's ranch. More trees, deeper valleys, streams cutting through rock in patterns that suggested ancient floods. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, and under different circumstances Ethan might have enjoyed the ride. Instead, every shadow became a potential threat. Every distant sound made his hand drift to his rifle. The weight of 6 dead men pressed on him, not with guilt. He'd do it again in a heartbeat, but with the knowledge of what he'd become. A killer. A man who'd crossed a line most never approached. For Lila. All for this small girl who rode beside him with her mother's murder fresh in her memory and a madman's claim hanging over her head. They reached Pine Ridge as dusk settled over the valley. It was barely more than a crossroads, a dozen buildings clustered around a muddy street, with forest pressing close on all sides. The trading post doubled as a tavern, light spilling from its windows and the sound of rough voices carrying on the evening air. Ethan pulled up outside and dismounted carefully, his vision swimming for a moment. Lila was beside him instantly, steadying him with surprising strength. You need food and rest, she said firmly, and medicine. We'll get supplies first, then find somewhere to camp outside town. You're being stupid. He looked down at her, surprised by the bluntness. She stared back, unflinching. Mama said men were always too proud to admit when they needed help, and it got them killed more often than bullets. Her small hand gripped his arm. You're hurt bad. You need a real bed and proper care, not a bedroll on the ground. Please. The please undid him. He nodded, too tired to argue, and let her guide him toward the trading post's entrance. The interior was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies, whiskey, and fried meat. A dozen men occupied the space, traders, hunters, drifters, all of them looking up when Ethan and Lila entered. The conversations didn't stop entirely, but they shifted, grew quieter, more watchful. Strangers always drew attention in small towns. Ethan knew that, but right now he was too exhausted to care. A woman stood behind the bar, heavy-set and sharp-eyed, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She took one look at Ethan's blood-soaked shirt and Lila's bruised face, and her expression shifted from suspicious to concerned. You need help, she said flatly. We need supplies and information about the circuit doctor. Doc Morrison's not due for another week, but I've patched up enough fools to know what I'm doing. She gestured toward a doorway behind the bar. Back room, bring the girl. Ethan hesitated. Trust was dangerous, especially now, but his options were limited, and this woman's directness appealed to something in him. She wasn't asking questions, wasn't prying, just offering help to someone who clearly needed it. Come on, Papa, Lila said quietly, playing the role they'd agreed on. Let the nice lady help you. Papa. The word still jarred him, but he followed the woman through the doorway into a small, surprisingly clean room with a narrow bed and a table covered with medical supplies. Professional, organized, not what he'd expected in a frontier trading post. Name's Agnes, the woman said, already rolling up her sleeves. And before you waste breath lying, I don't care who you are or what trouble you're running from. I see a man bleeding out and a scared child, and that's all I need to know. She pointed at the bed. Sit, shirt off. Ethan obeyed, peeling the blood-soaked fabric away from his wound. Agnes's expression didn't change as she examined the injury, but her fingers were gentle as she probed the edges. Bullet graze. Deep, but clean. You're lucky. Another inch and it would have punctured a lung. She glanced at Lila. Boil water. Pot's on the stove in the main room. Bring it back here with those clean cloths hanging by the door. Lila moved immediately, and Agnes watched her go with thoughtful eyes. That's not your daughter, she said quietly, once Lila was out of earshot. Ethan's hand moved toward his gun. Agnes noticed and snorted. Relax. I said I don't care about your business, and I meant it. But I've seen enough scared children in my time to recognize one being hunted. She began laying out instruments, needle, thread, bottles of clear liquid that probably burned like hellfire. Someone's after her. It wasn't a question. Ethan considered lying, then decided against it. This woman had already seen through too much. Yes. Someone with money and reach? How did you know? Agnes's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile in different circumstances. Because otherwise you'd have gone to the law instead of running. Rich men play by different rules out here. They buy judges and marshals like other folks buy cattle. She soaked a cloth in the clear liquid, alcohol, from the smell. This is gonna hurt. It did. Ethan gritted his teeth as she cleaned the wound, the alcohol burning like liquid fire. But he didn't make a sound. Didn't want Lila to hear and worry more than she already was. You killed the men he sent, Agnes said, still working. 6 of them. Good. Men who hunt children deserve killing. She glanced up, meeting his eyes. But you know it won't stop there. Rich men don't forgive, they don't forget. They just send more. I know. Lila returned with the hot water and cloths. Agnes worked in silence for a while, stitching the wound closed with neat, practiced movements. When she finished, she wrapped fresh bandages around Ethan's torso and stepped back to examine her work. You'll live. Keep it clean, change the dressing twice a day, and for the love of all that's holy, don't do anything stupid like riding 50 miles or getting in another gunfight. She looked pointedly at Ethan. Can you manage that? I'll try. Men always say that, then do exactly what I told them not to. Agnes turned to Lila. You. Make sure he rests. No riding tomorrow, no matter what he says. There's a room upstairs you can use. $2 a night, meals included. Ethan reached for his money pouch, but Agnes waved him off. Pay me tomorrow, if you're still here. Right now you need food and sleep, in that order. She brought them bowls of stew thick with meat and vegetables, fresh bread that was still warm, and strong coffee. Ethan ate mechanically, his body demanding fuel even as his mind remained alert for threats. Lila ate more slowly, savoring each bite like it might be her last good meal. The room upstairs was small but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. Ethan positioned himself where he could watch the approach, rifle within easy reach. Lila curled up on the bed, Margaret clutched to her chest, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. Ethan? She murmured as sleep began to claim her. Yeah? Are we going to be okay? He wanted to promise her they would, wanted to tell her everything would work out, that they'd find safety, that Holloway would give up and let them live in peace. But he'd learned the hard way that promises meant nothing against the cold realities of the world. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe, he said instead. That's the only promise I can make. She nodded, seeming to understand. That's enough. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into sleep. Ethan remained at the window, watching the street below, his mind working through possibilities and plans. They couldn't run forever. Eventually, Holloway would catch up to them, and when he did, Ethan needed to be ready. Needed to have leverage, information, something that could shift the balance of power. Dixon's last words echoed in his mind. You don't know what she means to him. What made one child so valuable that a wealthy man would spend years and a fortune hunting her? The contract explained the legal claim, but not the obsession. Not the relentless pursuit that had cost Rose Tanner her life and sent 6 men to their graves. There was something Ethan was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make sense of all this. A soft knock at the door brought him to his feet, rifle raised. Who is it? Agnes. Need to talk. He cracked the door open. Agnes stood in the hallway, a lantern in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. Her expression was grim. Saw this come in on today's stage, she said quietly, handing him the paper. Thought you should know. It was a Denver newspaper, 3 weeks old. The headline made Ethan's blood run cold. Prominent businessman offers reward for missing daughter. Below the headline was a sketch, not of Lila exactly, but close enough that anyone who'd seen her would make the connection. The article described her as Garrett Holloway's adopted daughter, allegedly kidnapped by her unstable birth mother who'd since been killed trying to resist arrest. A reward of $10,000 was offered for information leading to her safe return. $10,000. More money than most people would see in a lifetime. That changes things, Agnes said quietly. Every bounty hunter and desperate soul between here and California will be looking for her now. Ethan's mind raced. Holloway had flipped the narrative, made himself the victim and Lila's mother a criminal, made Lila herself into stolen property that needed recovering. And with that kind of money on the table, the law would actively help him. Marshals, sheriffs, even honest men who might have hesitated would be motivated by that reward. "We have to go," he said. "Now. In your condition, you won't make it 10 miles. And riding at night through unfamiliar country with a child? That's how you end up lost or dead." Agnes crossed her arms. "You need a plan, not panic." "I have a plan. Keep moving until we find somewhere Holloway can't reach." "There is nowhere he can't reach. Not with that kind of money and influence." She paused, studying him. "But there might be someone who can help you fight back." "Who?" "Judge Warren Blackwood. He presides over the territorial court in Cheyenne. I knew him years ago before I ended up running a trading post in the middle of nowhere." Her expression softened briefly. "He's one of the few honest men left in this territory. Can't be bought, can't be intimidated. If anyone can challenge Holloway's claim legally, it's him." "Cheyenne's 200 miles from here." 200 miles of hard travel with bounty hunters and hired guns looking for you, yes. But what's your alternative? Keep running until you're too tired to fight anymore? Until you make a mistake and they take her? Agnes's voice was sharp. "That child needs more than a man with a rifle. She needs the law on her side, the real law, not the bought and paid for kind." Ethan looked back at Lila, sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. Agnes was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. To truly save Lila, he needed to fight this on terms that mattered, in a courtroom with legal authority behind him. "How do we get to Cheyenne without being caught?" Agnes's smile was thin and dangerous. "You let me worry about that. I've helped more than a few folks disappear over the years. The Underground Railroad didn't just run east to west, if you take my meaning." Ethan understood. Agnes had been part of the network that smuggled escaped slaves to freedom before the war, which meant she knew how to move people without being seen, how to hide them in plain sight, how to stay ahead of hunters. "Why would you risk this?" he asked. "You don't know us." "Because I know what it looks like when the powerful prey on the powerless, and I've spent enough of my life standing by and doing nothing." She met his eyes. "That little girl in there deserves a chance, and you're fool enough to give it to her, even if it costs you everything. I respect that. What do you need from me?" "Rest tonight. Tomorrow I'll arrange transport that won't draw attention. There's a freight wagon heading east the day after. Supplies for the railroad camps. Driver owes me favors. You and the girl can hide in the back, travel undercover all the way to the territory line." She held up a hand before Ethan could protest. "It's not comfortable and it's not fast, but it's invisible. Better than riding through open country where every set of eyes might recognize her face." It made sense. Ethan didn't like trusting a stranger, but he was out of options and Agnes had already proven herself through action rather than words. "All right," he said finally, "but if this is a trap, then I'm a damn fool who's wasting a perfectly good opportunity to collect $10,000. Agnes's smile was wry. "Get some sleep, Cole. Or whatever your real name is, you're going to need your strength." She left, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Ethan secured the door and returned to his watch at the window, though exhaustion made his eyes heavy and his thoughts slow. Below, the street was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers making their way home from the tavern. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the drama playing out above their heads, unaware that a child's fate hung in the balance, dependent on a wounded rancher and a network of questionable allies. Ethan's side throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to dying, how easily Lila could have been taken while he bled out in his yard. The margin between success and failure, between life and death, was razor thin. But they were still alive, still free, still fighting. And tomorrow they'd take another step toward safety, toward justice, toward the chance of a life where Lila didn't have to look over her shoulder every moment. It would have to be enough. He dozed fitfully through the night, jerking awake at every sound, hand always on his rifle. Lila slept deeply, her small face peaceful in the moonlight that filtered through the window. She looked younger in sleep, more vulnerable, and the sight strengthened Ethan's resolve. He would get her to Cheyenne. He would find this Judge Blackwood. He would fight Holloway in a court of law where money and influence couldn't simply override truth and justice. And if the law failed, if Blackwood turned out to be just another man who could be bought, then Ethan would take Lila and disappear so completely that not even Holloway's vast resources could find them. Whatever it took, for as long as it took, because somewhere in the past few days, this child had become his responsibility, his purpose, the reason he got up each morning and kept fighting when every instinct screamed to give up. She'd become his daughter in all the ways that mattered. Dawn came gray and cold, the sun struggling to break through a layer of clouds that promised rain. Ethan woke to find Lila already up, sitting at the window with Margaret in her lap, watching the street below with those two watchful eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." She turned to look at him. "Your bandages need changing." She helped him unwrap the old dressing, her small hands surprisingly steady. The wound looked better than he'd expected. No signs of infection, the stitches holding clean. Agnes knew her business. They went downstairs to find the trading post already busy with early risers. Agnes served them breakfast without comment, though Ethan caught her meaningful glance toward a man sitting alone in the corner. Older, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his life on freight routes. That would be their ride to Cheyenne. After breakfast, Agnes pulled them aside. "Wagon leaves tomorrow at dawn. Be ready to move fast. You'll have maybe an hour between when word spreads about the reward and when every treasure hunter in 3 counties shows up looking." She pressed a small bag into Ethan's hand. "Extra medical supplies. And this." Inside the bag was a bundle of clothes, plain, worn, the kind that wouldn't draw attention. And beneath them, a folded document. "Transfer of custody," Agnes explained quietly. "From one widower to another, both names conveniently illegible due to water damage. Won't hold up to serious scrutiny, but it might buy you time if you're stopped on the road. Makes you look like a grieving father transporting his daughter, not a kidnapper with stolen property." Ethan stared at the paper, at the careful forgery that transformed their relationship from criminal to legal in the eyes of anyone who didn't look too closely. It was brilliant and dangerous in equal measure. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for everything Agnes was risking. "Thank me by getting that child to safety. And Cole?" She fixed him with a hard stare. "Judge Blackwood's a good man, but he's bound by law. Be prepared for the possibility that the law won't save you, that you might have to save yourselves." "I know." "Good. Now get out of my sight before someone sees you and gets ideas about that reward." They spent the day in their room, staying out of sight, resting and preparing for the journey ahead. Ethan cleaned and checked his weapons, rationed their supplies, and tried not to think about the 200 miles of hostile territory between them and Cheyenne. Lila sat on the bed, talking quietly to Margaret, having conversations only she could hear. It should have been heartbreaking, this child's need for companionship manifesting in a rag doll. But watching her, Ethan saw something different, saw resilience, saw a small person refusing to be broken by circumstances that would have destroyed most adults. She was stronger than she knew, stronger than he'd been at her age, maybe stronger than he was now. "Tell me about Cheyenne," she said suddenly. "Is it big?" "Biggest town in the territory. Has real streets, brick buildings, a courthouse. Law that means something." "Will we be safe there?" Ethan considered lying, offering false comfort, then decided she deserved the truth. "I don't know. But we'll have a better chance than we do running. A chance to fight back instead of just surviving." She nodded thoughtfully. "Mama always said running was temporary. That eventually you had to stand and face what was chasing you, or it would chase you forever." Her voice dropped. She just didn't get the chance. We'll make our stand for her, for you, for everyone Holloway's hurt. Ethan sat beside her on the bed. And when this is over, when you're safe, you can decide what kind of life you want, where you want to go, who you want to be. Can I stay with you? The question hit him like a physical blow. Stay with him, make their temporary alliance permanent, transform from protector to father, from obligation to family. Is that what you want? I think so. She looked up at him with those enormous eyes. You're not like other grown-ups. You listen, you don't lie to me, and when you promise something, you mean it. She hesitated. Is it okay if I call you Papa? For real, not just pretend? Ethan's throat closed. He thought of Sarah, of Catherine, of the family he'd lost, and the empty years since. Thought of how this small, fierce child had crashed into his life and forced him to feel again, to care again, to be something more than a ghost haunting his own existence. Yeah, he managed. Yeah, that's okay. She smiled and leaned against him, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding tight to this second chance he'd never expected to receive. Outside, the rain finally came, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm that felt like a promise. Tomorrow they'd leave, risking everything on a desperate gamble that the law could protect what wealth and violence threatened to destroy. But tonight, in this small room above a frontier trading post, a broken man and a hunted child sat together and dared to hope. And for now, that was enough. The freight wagon rumbled east through rain-soaked country, its canvas cover keeping the worst of the weather off the cargo piled high in the bed. Buried beneath crates of mining equipment and barrels of salted meat, Ethan and Lila huddled in a space barely large enough for both of them, breathing stale air thick with the smell of canvas and rust. The driver, a taciturn man named Hewitt, who'd exchanged maybe 10 words with them before sealing them inside, had been true to Agnes's promise. He'd loaded them before dawn, hidden them deep in the cargo, and arranged the freight to create a pocket of space that wouldn't be obvious to casual inspection. But it was cramped, dark, and every jolt of the wagon sent pain lancing through Ethan's barely healed wound. Lila bore it without complaint, pressed against his side, Margaret clutched tight. She'd learned stillness these past days, the kind of frozen quiet that prey animals adopted when predators prowled near. It broke Ethan's heart even as it kept them safe. The journey stretched into hours, then days. They emerged only when Hewitt gave the all-clear signal, 2 sharp raps on the wagon bed, usually in the dead hours between midnight and dawn when they'd stopped in isolated places far from prying eyes. Then they'd climb out, stiff and aching, to relieve themselves and stretch muscles cramped from confinement before crawling back into their hiding place. Hewitt fed them sparingly, hardtack and jerky, water from his canteen, and spoke even less. But his eyes, when they met Ethan's, held a grim understanding. He knew what they were running from, and he knew what would happen if they were caught. On the third night, Hewitt's signal came earlier than usual. Ethan pushed aside the crate blocking their exit and emerged into darkness broken only by a sliver of moon. They'd stopped in a narrow valley, trees pressing close on both sides, the sound of a creek running somewhere nearby. Trouble? Ethan asked quietly, his hand already on his rifle. Not yet, but there's a checkpoint ahead. Territorial marshals got men stopping wagons on the main road, checking for contraband and fugitives. Hewitt spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Word is they're looking specific for a man and a girl, got descriptions and everything. Ethan's blood ran cold. How specific? Specific enough that hiding you under cargo won't cut it if they do a real search. These ain't lazy deputies. They're serious, motivated. Someone's paying them good money to be thorough. Holloway. The man's reach was even longer than Ethan had feared. He'd bought himself marshals now, turned the territorial law into his personal hunting dogs. What are our options? I can try to bluff through. I'm known on this route, got papers showing legitimate freight. Might be they'll wave me on without looking too close. Hewitt's expression was doubtful. But if they search and find you, I'm going to jail alongside you, and that girl goes straight back to whoever's paying for her. Ethan looked at Lila, saw the fear in her eyes even as she tried to hide it. They'd come so far. Cheyenne was maybe 50 miles ahead now, close enough to taste. But those 50 miles might as well be 500 if they couldn't get past this checkpoint. There another route? Game trails through the high country, rough going, take twice as long, and you'd be on foot carrying what you can manage. But it bypasses the main road entirely. Hewitt gestured toward the dark trees. Your horses are still tied in back. You could make it if you're willing to risk the wilderness. Risk the wilderness or risk the checkpoint. Neither option was good, but at least in the wild they'd only be fighting terrain and weather, not armed men with legal authority to take Lila. We'll take the trails, Ethan decided. Hewitt nodded like he'd expected that answer. He helped them unload their horses and gear, working quickly in the darkness. When everything was ready, he pressed a folded map into Ethan's hands, marked the trails in red, follow the ridgeline north, then cut east through Copper Canyon. There's an old trading post at the far end, abandoned now, but the structure's still sound. You can shelter there, rest, then push the final 20 miles into Cheyenne. He paused. And Cole? When you get there, find Judge Blackwood fast. Every hour you're visible in that town is another chance for someone to recognize the girl and turn you in. I know. Thank you for everything. Thank Agnes. I'm just settling an old debt. Hewitt climbed back onto the wagon seat. Good luck. You're going to need it. The wagon rolled away, leaving them alone in the darkness with just their horses and the unknown dangers of the high country ahead. Lila looked up at Ethan, her face pale in the moonlight. Can we really make it through the wilderness? We don't have a choice, but yeah, we can make it. I've traveled this country before, know how to read the land. It won't be easy, but we'll manage. They mounted up and headed into the trees, following the game trail that was barely visible even in daylight. The forest closed around them like a living thing, all whispers and shadows and the constant sense of being watched. Night creatures called from the branches above, owls and nighthawks, and smaller things rustled through the undergrowth. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up the side of a ridge that seemed to go on forever. Ethan's wound throbbed with each jarring step, and he could feel fresh blood seeping through the bandages, but he gritted his teeth and kept going, knowing that stopping meant dying, and dying meant Lila would face Holloway alone. Dawn found them high above the valley floor, looking out over a landscape of endless peaks and valleys shrouded in morning mist. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure, pristine wilderness that could kill the unprepared as easily as any gunman. They rested briefly, sharing water and the last of their food. Ethan studied Hewitt's map, tracing their route with one finger. If they maintained their pace, they'd reach Copper Canyon by nightfall and the abandoned trading post shortly after. From there, Cheyenne was close enough to reach in a day's hard ride. So close. But close meant nothing if they didn't survive the journey. They pushed on through morning and into afternoon, the trail growing narrower and more treacherous as they climbed higher. In places, they had to dismount and lead the horses across sections where one wrong step would send them plunging hundreds of feet down shale-covered slopes. Lila never complained, never balked at the danger. She followed Ethan's instructions exactly, trusted him completely, and that trust was its own kind of burden. She believed he could keep her safe. He had to make that belief reality. The sun was westering when they finally reached the canyon rim. Below them, Copper Canyon cut through the mountains like a wound, its walls rising sheer and red on both sides. The trail descended in a series of sharp switchbacks, testing their nerve and their horses' footing. Halfway down, Ethan's mare stumbled. He felt her legs buckle, had just enough time to kick free of the stirrups before she went down. He hit the ground hard, his wounded side screaming, and watched in horror as the horse slid toward the edge. No! Lila's scream was raw with terror. But the mare caught herself, scrambling for purchase on the loose rock, and somehow managed to regain her footing. She stood trembling, foam flecking her neck, but alive and sound. Ethan dragged himself upright, vision swimming. Fresh blood soaked his shirt. The fall had torn open his stitches. Lila was beside him instantly, her small face white with fear. You're bleeding again. I'm all right. You're not all right. You're hurt bad. Her voice cracked. Please don't die. Please. The naked fear in those words steadied him somehow. He cupped her face with both hands, making her look at him. I'm not going to die. Not from this. Not from anything, until you're safe. You understand? I made you a promise, and I keep my promises. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm trying to be brave like Mama. You are brave. Braver than any child should have to be. He pulled her close, holding tight despite the pain. But you don't have to be brave alone anymore. We've got each other now. They made the rest of the descent carefully, leading both horses, taking no chances. By the time they reached the canyon floor, full dark had fallen, and Ethan was swaying with exhaustion and blood loss. He needed to stop, to rest, but the trading post was still hours away, and night travel through this terrain was suicide. There! Lila pointed to an overhang in the canyon wall, deep enough to shelter them and the horses. Can we stop there? It wasn't ideal, too exposed, too visible to anyone passing through the canyon, but Ethan's body was giving out. He nodded, and they made their way to the overhang. Lila took charge with a competence born of necessity. She tended the horses, rationed their dwindling water supply, then turned her attention to Ethan. Her small hands were steady as she unwrapped his bandages, exposing the wound that had indeed torn open. This needs stitching again, she said quietly. I know, but we don't have proper supplies. We have needle and thread and whiskey. She met his eyes. Mama taught me. I can do it. Ethan wanted to refuse, to spare her the burden of having to stitch human flesh at 7 years old. But his vision was graying at the edges, and infection was a real threat now. If they didn't close the wound properly, he'd be dead within days. Okay, he said. Do what you need to do. She worked by firelight, a tiny flame shielded deep in the overhang where it wouldn't be visible from the canyon floor. Her stitches were crooked and uneven, nothing like Agnes's professional work, but she got the wound closed. Ethan bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out, not wanting to frighten her more than this already had. When she finished, her hands were shaking and tears tracked through the dirt on her face. But she'd done it. This small child had performed field surgery on a grown man because survival demanded it. You did good, Ethan told her, real good. I was so scared. So was I. But we got through it. He pulled her close, and she curled against his uninjured side, exhausted. Get some sleep. I'll keep watch. You need sleep more than me. We'll take turns. You sleep first. She was too tired to argue. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, one small hand still clutching Margaret. Ethan sat with his back against stones still warm from the day's sun, rifle across his lap, and stared out at the darkness. They'd been running for nearly a week now. A week of constant fear, constant vigilance, never knowing if the next moment would bring discovery and capture. The strain showed in Lila's gaunt face, in the way she startled at every sound, in the nightmares that made her cry out in her sleep. This was no life for a child. But what choice did they have? Keep running until they found safety, or surrender her to a man who viewed her as property to be collected? The night stretched long and cold. Ethan dozed fitfully, jerking awake at shadows and phantom sounds. Once he thought he heard hoofbeats echoing through the canyon, but when he listened closely, there was nothing but wind and his own racing heartbeat. Dawn came gray and cheerless. They ate the last of their food, just a handful of hardtack each, and drank sparingly from the canteen. Then they mounted up and continued through the canyon, following the trail markers on Hewitt's map. The abandoned trading post appeared around midday, exactly where the map indicated. It had been substantial once, a 2-story log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Now it sagged with age and neglect, windows broken, door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. But the roof looked mostly intact, and the walls would provide better shelter than an overhang. They approached cautiously, Ethan's hand on his rifle, watching for signs of other travelers or squatters. But the post was empty, inhabited only by mice and the ghosts of better days. Inside, dust covered everything in a thick gray blanket. A counter still stood along one wall, empty shelves behind it. A few pieces of broken furniture littered the main room. Stairs led up to the second floor, but Ethan didn't trust them to bear weight. We'll rest here a few hours, he said. Let the horses recover, get some real sleep ourselves. Then we push through to Cheyenne tonight. Lila explored while he tended the horses, her footsteps echoing in the empty building. She called out suddenly from another room, "Ethan, come look." He found her standing in what had once been the storeroom. Crates and barrels lined the walls, most empty or broken. But one crate in the corner still had contents, canned goods, their labels faded but readable. "Food," Lila breathed. "Real food." Ethan pried open the crate. Peaches, beans, tomatoes, all long expired by any normal standard. But canned goods could last for years if the seals held. He selected a can of peaches, opened it with his knife, and sniffed carefully. Still good. They ate directly from the cans, not bothering with plates or utensils. The peaches were the best thing Ethan had tasted in weeks. Sweet and cold, and blessedly different from hardtack and jerky. Lila closed her eyes in bliss, juice running down her chin. "I never thought old peaches could taste so good," she said. "Everything tastes good when you're hungry enough." They ate their fill, packed the remaining cans in their saddlebags, then settled in to rest. Ethan made a nest of old blankets he'd found in another room, mouse-eaten but clean enough, and Lila curled up immediately, asleep almost before her head touched the makeshift pillow. He should have slept too. His body screamed for it. But something kept him restless, pacing to the windows, watching the approaches. A feeling he'd learned to trust over years of frontier living, the sense that danger was close even when nothing visible suggested it. The afternoon wore on. Shadows lengthened across the canyon floor. Ethan's unease grew stronger with each passing hour, until finally he couldn't ignore it anymore. "Lila." He shook her gently. "Wake up, we need to move." She came awake instantly, no grogginess, already reaching for her boots. "What's wrong?" "Don't know, but we're too exposed here. Better to travel now, reach Cheyenne before full dark." They were saddling the horses when Ethan heard it. The distant sound of riders approaching from the west. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace. Could be innocent travelers, could be anything. But every instinct he possessed screamed danger. "Mount up," he ordered. "Now." They swung into their saddles and rode east, pushing the horses to a canter. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. No question now, someone was following them, and they were moving fast. The canyon narrowed ahead, funneling them toward a bottleneck where the walls closed to within 50 feet of each other. Beyond that, the land opened into rolling foothills, and eventually, Cheyenne. But they had to get through the narrows first. Ethan risked a glance back. 5 riders, maybe 6, gaining ground. Too far to make out faces, but he didn't need to see them to know what they were. Bounty hunters. Men chasing that $10,000 reward. "Faster!" he shouted to Lila. They galloped through the narrows, hooves clattering on stone, echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. A shot rang out behind them, too far for accuracy but close enough to be terrifying. The riders were within rifle range now. The canyon opened into foothills just as another volley of shots split the air. Ethan heard one bullet whine past his head, felt another tug at his coat. Lila's horse screamed and stumbled, but stayed up, kept running. They crested a rise, and Ethan saw it. Cheyenne spread out in the valley below. Streets and buildings, civilization, law that might actually mean something. So close. But the riders were right behind them, and there was no way they'd make it to town before being overtaken. He had to make a choice. Run and risk being shot in the back, or stand and fight with Lila caught in the crossfire. There was no good choice. There never was. Ethan pulled up hard, wheeling his horse around. "Lila, ride for town. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just ride." "Not without you. Do it." His voice cracked like a whip. "Find Judge Blackwood. Tell him everything. He'll protect you." "Papa, please, go." He slapped her horse's rump hard. The mare bolted toward town, Lila clinging to its back, her scream of protest fading as distance grew between them. Then Ethan turned to face the riders alone. They thundered up the rise, 5 hard-faced men with guns drawn and greed in their eyes. They pulled up 30 yards away, spreading out in a rough line, covering all angles. The one in the lead, a lean man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, smiled coldly. "That was stupid, Cole. Could have made this easy. Now we do it hard." "The girl's going to town. She'll be under the judge's protection before you get anywhere near her." "Judge Blackwood?" The scarred man laughed. That old fool, he's got no authority over legal custody disputes, and we've got papers that say she belongs to Garrett Holloway. All nice and legal. Those papers are worth less than the lies they're written on. Maybe, but that's for courts to decide. Our job is just to collect the merchandise and deliver it. He gestured with his pistol. Now, you can ride after her and we can kill you, or you can be smart and walk away. 10 seconds to decide. Ethan's mind raced. If he fought, he'd die. 5 against 1 with no cover and nowhere to run. But if he died, no one would know the truth about Holloway, about what the man really wanted with Lila. No one would understand why she'd spent her whole life running, why her mother had died protecting her. But if he lived, he lowered his rifle slowly, raising both hands. All right, you win. The scarred man's eyes narrowed with suspicion. That easy? I'm not dying for a lost cause. Take her. Collect your blood money. I'll find another ranch somewhere far from here and try to forget this whole damn mess. It was the right thing to say. The words of a man who'd finally broken, who'd decided survival was more important than honor. The bounty hunters relaxed fractionally, greed overcoming caution. The scarred man gestured to 2 of his companions. Miller, Stokes, ride after the girl. Rest of us will make sure Cole here doesn't change his mind. The 2 men spurred their horses toward town. Ethan watched them go, every muscle coiled tight, waiting for the right moment. It came when they were 50 yards away, just as the remaining 3 hunters started to relax. Ethan moved. He dropped from his saddle, using the horse as cover, and came up with his rifle already firing. The first shot took the scarred man in the chest. The second caught another hunter in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third and fourth missed as the remaining hunter fired back, forcing Ethan to dive behind a boulder. Bullets chipped stone around him, deadly splinters flying. He levered another round, leaned out, fired. The wounded hunter went down. 2 left. But they'd scattered, taking cover, and now Ethan was pinned. He'd bought Lila time. The 2 riders going after her would reach town to find her already under protection, but he was trapped here with 2 angry men and limited ammunition. A voice called from behind another rock. "You're dead, Cole! No way out!" Maybe. But he'd take as many of them with him as he could. He waited, counting heartbeats, listening for movement. Patience was survival out here. Russian you died. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then he heard it, the subtle scrape of boot on stone, someone trying to flank him. Ethan rolled left, came up firing. The hunter had been closer than expected, nearly on top of him. Ethan's shot caught him in the belly, and the man went down screaming, 1 left. "Just you and me now," Ethan called. "You ready to die for that reward money?" Silence. Then, "How about we both walk away? No sense dying over a girl who's already gone." "You first. Drop your gun where I can see it and ride out. I'll give you that chance." More silence. Ethan could almost hear the man thinking, weighing options. Finally, All right, you win." A gun sailed through the air, landing in clear view. Ethan kept his rifle trained on the spot where it had come from, waiting. The hunter emerged slowly, hands raised. He was younger than the others, maybe 25, with the look of someone who'd gotten in over his head and knew it. "I'm riding out," he said. "No trouble." "Smart man." The hunter backed toward his horse, moving carefully, never turning his back. He mounted up, still keeping his hands visible. Then he wheeled the horse and galloped west, back the way they'd come. Ethan waited until he disappeared from view, then sagged against the boulder. His wound had opened again, blood soaking his shirt. His hands shook from adrenaline crash, but he was alive. And Lila had made it to town. He gathered his strength and stumbled back to his horse. The ride into Cheyenne passed in a blur of pain and determination. He kept seeing Lila's face as he'd sent her away, the terror and betrayal in her eyes when he'd made her leave him. She'd think he was dead. Or worse, that he'd abandoned her. He had to get to her. Had to show her he'd kept his promise. Cheyenne's streets were crowded with evening traffic. Miners, railroad workers, merchants closing up shop. Ethan rode through them like a ghost, barely registering the stares his blood-soaked appearance drew. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a 3-story brick building that dominated the square. Ethan dismounted, tied his horse, and climbed the steps on legs that barely held him. Inside, a clerk looked up from his desk, eyes widening. Sir, you need a doctor. Judge Blackwood. Where is he? In his chambers, but Ethan pushed past him, following the signs. He found the judge's office on the second floor and kicked the door open without knocking. Judge Warren Blackwood was a silver-haired man in his 60s, dressed in severe black, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up from his papers at Ethan's dramatic entrance, taking in the blood and desperation without visible alarm. I assume you have a good reason for bursting into my chambers, he said mildly. I need protection for a child, legal protection. A man named Garrett Holloway is trying to claim her as property, and he's got bounty hunters and marshals helping him. Ethan swayed, caught himself on the doorframe. She's here. In town. They're hunting her. This child, where is she now? I don't know. I sent her ahead to find you. Small girl, 7 years old, dark hair, bruised face. She's... Uncle Warren! Ethan turned to see Lila running down the hallway, a matronly woman in pursuit. The girl threw herself at him, nearly knocking him over, sobbing into his chest. You're alive! I thought they killed you! Takes more than that, Ethan managed, holding her tight despite the pain. Judge Blackwood rose from his desk, coming around to examine them both with those penetrating eyes. Mrs. Henderson, please fetch Dr. Morrison, and send word to Marshal Kane that I need him here immediately. He gestured to chairs near his desk. Sit, both of you, before you fall down. And then you're going to tell me everything. So Ethan did. He told the judge about finding Lila in the ravine, about Rose Tanner's murder, about the contract and Holloway's obsessive pursuit. He told him about the 6 men buried on his ranch, about running and hiding and fighting for this child's life. He showed the forged custody papers Agnes had provided, the newspaper with its twisted version of events. Everything. Lila sat pressed against his side, occasionally adding details Ethan missed. Her voice was small but steady as she described her mother's death, the years of running, the terror of never being safe. Judge Blackwood listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively grimmer. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. This is deeply troubling. The contract you describe, even if legitimate, cannot supersede basic human rights. A child is not property to be bought and sold. He paused. However, challenging a man of Holloway's wealth and influence will require irrefutable evidence and absolute legal precision. He'll have lawyers, resources, political connections. So you can't help us. Ethan's voice was flat with defeat. I didn't say that. Blackwood's eyes hardened. I said it will be difficult. But difficult and impossible are not the same thing. He looked at Lila. Young lady, are you willing to testify about what you've witnessed? In a courtroom, under oath, knowing that powerful men will try to discredit you? Lila lifted her chin. If it means stopping Mr. Holloway, yes. Good. Because that's exactly what we're going to do. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, a pragmatic man who'd seen enough frontier violence that Ethan's wounds barely raised an eyebrow. He worked efficiently, cleaning and restitching while Judge Blackwood made arrangements in the outer office. Lila sat nearby, watching every movement with those vigilant eyes, Margaret clutched tight in her arms. You're lucky, Morrison said as he tied off the final stitch. Another day without proper treatment and infection would have killed you. As it is, you'll need at least 2 weeks of rest before you're anywhere near recovered. Don't have 2 weeks, Ethan replied. Then you'll die. Your choice. Morrison packed his instruments away. Keep the wound clean, change dressings twice daily, and for the love of all that's holy, stop getting shot at. Blackwood returned as Morrison was leaving, accompanied by a tall man with a marshal's star pinned to his vest. The lawman studied Ethan with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read danger in a heartbeat. This is Marshal Thomas Kane, Blackwood said. Tom, this is Ethan Cole and the child Lila. They'll be staying under protective custody until we can arrange a proper hearing. Kane's eyes narrowed. Warren, you know what you're asking? Garrett Holloway's got half the territory in his pocket. Judges, politicians, lawmen, all bought and paid for. You go against him, you'll have every crooked official from here to Denver coming down on you. Then it's fortunate I don't answer to crooked officials. Blackwood's voice was steel wrapped in silk. This is my courtroom, my jurisdiction, and I'll be damned if I let a child be sold like livestock while I have breath in my body. Kane studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'm with you, but we do this smart. Holloway's got resources. He'll fight dirty, use every legal trick, maybe some illegal ones too. Let him try. I've been waiting 30 years for a case worth staking my reputation on. This is it. Blackwood turned to Ethan. You and Lila will stay in the rooms behind my chambers. It's not luxurious, but it's secure, and it keeps you close. Marshal Kane will post guards, and I'll begin preparing our case immediately. What case? Ethan asked. Holloway's got a signed contract. In the eyes of the law is more than paper and signatures. It's about justice, humanity, the fundamental rights we claim to uphold in this territory. Blackwood's expression was fierce. That contract may be legally binding in a commercial sense, but it cannot supersede the 13th Amendment. Slavery is abolished. That includes contracts that treat human beings as property, regardless of when they were signed or how much money changed hands. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest, fragile but real. You can argue that. I can argue it. Whether I can win depends on the evidence we present and how effectively we dismantle Holloway's case. He looked at Lila, which means I need you to tell me everything about Garrett Holloway. Every conversation your mother had about him, every detail she shared, anything that might help us understand why he wants you so desperately. Lila's face went pale, but she nodded. Mama didn't talk about him much, said remembering hurt too much. But sometimes, late at night when she thought I was sleeping, she'd cry and say things. What kinds of things? That he was a collector. That he liked beautiful, rare things and wanted to own them forever. That he'd paid for me before I was born because he wanted, she swallowed hard, because he wanted a daughter who would be perfect, pretty and smart and trained from birth to be exactly what he desired. The words hung in the air like poison. Ethan felt his stomach turn. This wasn't about labor or even the twisted logic of indentured servitude. This was about a wealthy man who wanted to own a human being the way others owned paintings or sculptures, something beautiful to possess and control completely. Did your mother ever mention other children? Blackwood asked quietly. Lila's eyes widened. There were others? I don't know, but a man with Holloway's proclivities rarely stops at one attempt. If he tried to purchase you, he may have tried with others. Blackwood made a note on his paper. We'll need to investigate that. Evidence of a pattern could strengthen our case significantly. Marshal Kane shifted his weight. Warren, you're talking about accusing one of the wealthiest men in the territory of child trafficking. The kind of accusation that ruins careers if you can't prove it. Then we'll prove it. Blackwood's voice was absolute. Ethan, you said Dixon mentioned something before he died. That you didn't know what Lila meant to Holloway. What exactly did he say? Ethan searched his memory, trying to recall the exact words through the fog of pain and adrenaline. He said Holloway would never stop, that I didn't know what she meant to him. Then he died before he could explain. But he implied there was something specific, something beyond the contract. Blackwood tapped his pen against the desk. We need to find out what that is. Tom, can you send telegrams to Denver? Discreetly inquire about Holloway's background, his business dealings, any rumors or scandals? I can do that. But if Holloway's got telegraph operators on his payroll, he'll know we're digging. Let him know. Let him understand that we're not intimidated by his wealth or his influence. Blackwood stood. Now, both of you need rest. The hearing is set for 3 days from now. That gives us time to prepare, but not much. Holloway will have lawyers here by tomorrow at the latest. He led them to the rooms behind his chambers, small but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. Lila climbed onto the mattress immediately, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan settled into a chair by the window, rifle across his lap despite Kane's assurances that guards were posted. Old habits died hard. Lila's voice came soft from the bed. Papa, do you think the judge can really help us? I think he's going to try. That's more than most would do. But what if it's not enough? What if Mr. Holloway wins and they take me away? Ethan looked at this child who'd been running her entire life, who'd watched her mother die, who'd survived terrors that would have broken most adults. She deserved better than platitudes and false promises. Then we run again, he said simply. We go somewhere so remote that even Holloway can't find us. Canada, maybe, or Mexico. Somewhere we can disappear completely. You do that? Give up everything for me? I already did. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed. You're my daughter now. Not because of papers or laws, but because I choose you and you chose me. Nothing Holloway does can change that. She reached for his hand, holding tight. I'm glad I screamed that day. Glad you heard me. Me too. Sleep claimed them both eventually, though Ethan's was fitful and broken by dreams of courtrooms that turned into battlefields, of judges who wore Holloway's face, of Lila being dragged away while he stood paralyzed and helpless. He woke to dawn light and the sound of activity in the outer office. Blackwood was already at work, papers spread across his desk, making notes in tight, precise handwriting. Marshal Kane sat nearby, reading through a stack of telegrams. Holloway's lawyers arrived an hour ago, Kane said when Ethan emerged. 3 of them, all from big Denver firms. They're already filing motions to dismiss, claiming jurisdiction issues and demanding immediate return of the child. And? Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. And Judge Blackwood denied every motion. Hearing proceeds as scheduled. Kane's smile was grim. They're not happy. Already threatening appeals, complaints to the territorial governor, the whole arsenal. Let them threaten. Blackwood didn't look up from his writing. The law is on our side, even if enforcement often isn't. We just need to make our case clearly enough that no amount of political pressure can overturn it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Blackwood interviewed Lila for hours, gentle but thorough, extracting every detail about her life with Rose Tanner, the men who'd pursued them, the circumstances of her mother's death. He had her write out everything she remembered, creating a narrative that was heartbreaking in its simple honesty. Ethan provided his own testimony, documenting the gunfight at his ranch, Dixon's words, the newspaper article with its distorted version of events. Blackwood listened to everything, asked sharp questions, and slowly built what he called their foundation of truth. Meanwhile, Kane's telegraph inquiries bore fruit. Information trickled in about Holloway. Business dealings that skirted legality, bankruptcies of rivals under suspicious circumstances, rumors of impropriety with young women in his employ. Nothing concrete enough to charge him with crimes, but enough to establish a pattern of ruthless behavior and disregard for others' welfare. More disturbing were the reports of other children. 3 cases in the past 15 years where Holloway had arranged adoptions or indenture contracts, always with young girls, always from desperate mothers. 2 of those girls had died in household accidents before reaching adolescence. The 3rd had disappeared entirely, her fate unknown. This man is a monster, Blackwood said quietly, reading through the reports. And he's been operating with impunity because his victims were powerless, and he had the wealth to bury any investigation. Can we use this in court? Ethan asked. Some of it. Enough to establish pattern and motive. Enough to make a judge question the legitimacy of any contract he presents. Blackwood set the papers aside. But Ethan, you need to prepare yourself. Even if we win custody, even if we invalidate the contract, Holloway won't stop. He'll appeal, file new claims, use every legal maneuver available. This could drag on for years. I know. And at any point, he might decide legal avenues aren't working and resort to extra-legal ones. More bounty hunters, kidnapping, worse. Blackwood met his eyes. You'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Already am, Ethan said. Has been since Catherine and Sarah died. At least now I've got a reason worth the vigilance. The day of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Lila dressed carefully in one of the simple dresses Blackwood's housekeeper had provided, her hair brushed and braided, her face scrubbed clean. She looked impossibly young and impossibly brave. Remember, Blackwood told her as they prepared to enter the courtroom, tell the truth simply and clearly. Don't embellish, don't guess at things you don't know. If Holloway's lawyers try to confuse you, just take your time and answer honestly. She nodded, gripping Margaret like a talisman. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through Cheyenne that Judge Blackwood was taking on Garrett Holloway, and spectators filled every available seat. Ethan spotted several well-dressed men who could only be Holloway's lawyers, along with a handful of men who had the look of hired guns. Insurance, in case legal means failed. And there, in the front row, sat Garrett Holloway himself. Ethan had imagined a monster, something visibly corrupt and evil. Instead, he saw a distinguished man in his 50s, silver-haired and handsome, dressed in an expensive suit with a gold watch chain across his vest. He looked like any successful businessman, respectable and cultured. Until you saw his eyes, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of warmth as they fixed on Lila with the intensity of a collector appraising a valuable acquisition. Lila saw him too and shrank against Ethan's side. He put his arm around her shoulders, a silent promise of protection. All rise for the Honorable Judge Warren Blackwood. The courtroom stood as Blackwood entered and took his seat at the bench. He surveyed the assembly with those sharp eyes, missing nothing, then gavelled the session to order. We are here to determine the matter of custody regarding the minor child known as Lila Tanner. Mr. Holloway claims legal right to custody based on a contract signed by the child's mother. Mr. Cole claims the child is under his protection and that Mr. Holloway's pursuit of her constitutes an illegal attempt at human trafficking. Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. This court will hear evidence from both parties and render a decision based on law and justice, not wealth or influence. Counsel for Mr. Holloway, you may present your opening statement. The lead lawyer stood, a sleek man named Pemberton, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he cared about. He laid out Holloway's position with lawyerly precision. The contract was legitimate, signed willingly by Rose Tanner in exchange for substantial financial compensation. Holloway had waited patiently for years, honoring his end of the agreement, only to have Tanner renege and flee with the child. All Holloway wanted was what was rightfully his, the daughter he'd legally acquired and planned to raise in wealth and privilege. My client is not some villain, Pemberton said, gesturing toward Holloway. He's a successful businessman who wanted a child to love and care for. He followed proper legal channels, paid generously for that right, and has been wronged by a woman who took his money and broke her word. The fact that Miss Tanner met an unfortunate end while resisting lawful recovery of the child is tragic, but it does not invalidate Mr. Holloway's legitimate claim. It was a masterful performance, making Holloway seem sympathetic and painting Rose Tanner as a thief and Ethan as a kidnapper. Several spectators nodded along, buying the narrative. Then Blackwood invited the defense to present their case. Ethan took the stand first, describing how he'd found Lila, the condition she'd been in, the men who'd come hunting her. He testified about Dixon's words, about the newspaper article that twisted the truth, about the violence required to protect a child from men who viewed her as property. Pemberton cross-examined viciously, trying to paint Ethan as an unstable widower who'd fixated on a child who reminded him of his dead daughter, trying to suggest his judgment was impaired by grief and that his violent response proved him unfit as a guardian. But Ethan had faced worse than lawyers' questions. He answered calmly, precisely, never losing his temper, never letting Pemberton rattle him. Then Lila took the stand. She looked impossibly small in the witness chair, her feet not reaching the floor. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. She told the court about growing up on the run, about her mother's constant fear, about the men who tracked them from town to town. She described watching her mother die, running until she couldn't run anymore, being found by Ethan. She explained what her mother had told her about the contract, that Holloway wanted to own her, to mold her into his perfect possession. He doesn't want a daughter, Lila said, looking directly at Holloway. He wants a doll, something pretty to keep in his house and show off to his friends. Mama said he'd done it before, to other girls. Said they died or disappeared because they couldn't be what he wanted, and he got rid of them. Pemberton objected immediately. Hearsay, Your Honor. The child is repeating unsubstantiated claims. Overruled, Blackwood said. The child is testifying to conversations with her mother. Continue, Lila. She did, her testimony growing more detailed, more damning. By the time she finished, several spectators were wiping their eyes, and even the bailiff looked disturbed. Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to shake her testimony, to suggest she'd been coached, to paint her as an unreliable witness. But Lila held firm, answering every question with simple honesty. Then Blackwood called Garrett Holloway to the stand. The man rose with perfect composure, taking his oath with a hand on the Bible and a slight smile. He presented himself as wounded, misunderstood, a victim of circumstances. I wanted a child to love, like he said in response to Blackwood's questions. My wife and I were unable to have children, and when she died, I was alone. Rose Tanner was a desperate woman with few options. I offered her a way out, financial security in exchange for a child I could raise as my own. It was a business arrangement, yes, but born from genuine desire for family. And the other children? Blackwood asked quietly. The 3 other contracts you arranged over the past 15 years? Holloway's composure flickered for just a moment. I don't know what you're referring to. Mary Caldwell, age 8, died falling from a horse on your estate in 1873. Emma Harris, age 9, drowned in your pond in 1876. Sarah Mitchell, age 7, disappeared from your Denver home in 1880 and was never found. Blackwood's voice was relentless. 3 children, all acquired through contracts similar to the one you made with Rose Tanner, all dead or missing before reaching adolescence. Would you care to explain that pattern? Those were tragic accidents. 3 dead children is not coincidence, Mr. Holloway. It's evidence of something far more sinister. Blackwood leaned forward. What happened when those children didn't meet your standards? When they weren't perfect enough, beautiful enough, compliant enough? What did you do with them? I loved those children. Holloway's mask cracked, fury bleeding through. I gave them everything, and they disappointed me. They were flawed, broken, not what I paid for. He caught himself, but too late. The truth had slipped out in a moment of anger, and the entire courtroom heard it. Not what I paid for, not children to love, but products to be evaluated and found wanting. Blackwood let the silence stretch, letting those words sink into every mind present. Then, quietly, no further questions. The testimony concluded with character witnesses, people Kane had tracked down who'd known the missing children, who testified about bruises seen, crying heard, rumors whispered. Nothing concrete enough for criminal charges, but damning in their cumulative weight. Pemberton tried to salvage the case in his closing argument, emphasizing the sanctity of contracts and the danger of allowing emotions to override law. But the damage was done. Holloway's own words had condemned him. Blackwood's closing was brief. This court recognizes that contracts have legal weight, but we also recognize that some contracts are void from inception. Contracts that violate fundamental human rights, that reduce people to property, that enable the powerful to exploit the vulnerable. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That includes all forms of ownership of human beings, regardless of what papers say otherwise. He looked at Lila, then at Holloway, then at the assembled crowd. This child is not property. She never was. And no amount of money, no legal maneuvering, no assertion of contract rights can change that fundamental truth. Any claim Mr. Holloway believes he has died the moment that contract was signed because it was illegal from its inception. He brought down his gavel. This court finds in favor of Ethan Cole. Full custody of the minor child, Lila Tanner, is granted to him, with all parental rights and responsibilities. Mr. Holloway's claim is dismissed with prejudice, and he is ordered to cease all attempts to contact or pursue this child. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for investigation of potential criminal charges related to the deaths and disappearance of Mary Caldwell, Emma Harris, and Sarah Mitchell. The courtroom erupted. Holloway surged to his feet, face purple with rage. You can't do this. I have rights. I paid for that child. You paid for nothing, Blackwood said coldly. And if you set foot near her again, I'll have you jailed for attempted kidnapping. Marshal Kane, please escort Mr. Holloway from my courtroom. Kane moved forward with 2 deputies. Holloway resisted, shouting threats and promises of appeals. But in the end, they hauled him out, his voice fading as distance grew. Ethan sat frozen, hardly daring to believe it was real. Then Lila threw herself into his arms, sobbing with relief and joy, and the release of fear she'd carried her entire life. We won, she whispered. We really won. Yeah, Ethan managed, his own eyes burning. We did. Blackwood descended from the bench, his usual stern expression softened into something almost like a smile. It's not completely over. Holloway will appeal, and his lawyers will make noise. But the precedent is set, the ruling is clear, and any judge who overturns it will have to explain why they believe children can be bought and sold. Thank you, Ethan said. The words were inadequate for what this man had done, but they were all he had. "Thank me by giving that girl a good life. That's all the payment I need." Blackwood paused. "Though I'll warn you, this ruling is going to draw attention. Other cases like Lila's might surface, other children trapped in similar contracts. You've opened a door here." "Good," Ethan said. "Let it open wide." The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful. They stayed in Cheyenne while Blackwood's housekeeper helped them acquire proper documents, legal guardianship papers, identification for Lila, everything needed to establish their new reality. Ethan sold his ranch through an agent, unable to return there himself but unwilling to leave that chapter completely unclosed. The money would give them a fresh start wherever they chose to settle. Holloway's promised appeal never materialized. Marshal Kane's investigation uncovered enough evidence of wrongdoing that the man faced criminal charges. He fled to San Francisco, where rumors said he lived in bitter, reclusive isolation. His business empire crumbled without him, bought up by competitors who had no patience for his particular obsessions. As Blackwood had predicted, other cases emerged. 2 more children in similar circumstances came to light, and in both instances, judges cited Blackwood's ruling as precedent for voiding the contracts. A movement began, small but growing, to close legal loopholes that allowed such arrangements. Change was slow, but it was change. Ethan and Lila left Cheyenne on a spring morning 3 months after the trial. They rode north toward Montana Territory and land that Ethan had scouted, good grazing country near a settlement large enough to have a school but small enough that everyone knew their neighbors. Lila had grown in those months, not just physically, though proper food had filled out her too thin frame, but in confidence. The haunted wariness had faded from her eyes, replaced by something lighter. She smiled now, laughed even, and the sound was music. They stopped on a rise overlooking their new land, a valley of grassland and timber with a creek running through it, mountains rising purple in the distance. The house that came with the property was small but solid, with room to expand, room to grow. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. Lila studied it with serious eyes, then smiled. "I think it's perfect. I think Mama would have loved it." They rode down together, into their new life, leaving the violence and fear behind. The ranch would need work, fences to mend, stock to acquire, 100 tasks that would fill their days. But they'd do it together, father and daughter, in all the ways that mattered. That evening, Ethan stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset behind the mountains. Lila sat beside him, her feet dangling, Margaret propped between them. "Papa?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Do you think Sarah would have liked me? If she'd lived?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I think she would have loved you. You're both stubborn and brave and too smart for your own good." He smiled. "And I think your mama and my Catherine would have been friends, would have understood each other." "I'd like that." Lila leaned against him. "I'm going to make you proud. Going to grow up strong and help people like Judge Blackwood helped us." "You already make me proud. Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered, a man and a child who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and become a family despite everything trying to tear them apart. The world was still dangerous, still full of people like Holloway who preyed on the vulnerable. But there were also people like Blackwood and Agnes and Hewitt who fought back in their own ways. And now there was Lila, who'd survived her own nightmare and would grow up remembering what it felt like to be hunted and helpless. She'd be strong, fierce, unwilling to stand by when others suffered what she'd suffered. She'd be exactly the kind of person the world needed. Ethan looked up at the emerging stars, at the vast Montana sky, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the deep knowledge that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, protecting this child, raising her, loving her. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Let's go inside. I'll teach you how to make your grandmother's biscuits. Sarah loved them, and I think you will too." Lila took his hand and they walked into their home together, into warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. They'd been broken, both of them, shattered by loss and violence and the cruelty of those who saw people as things to be owned. But somehow, impossibly, They'd found each other and pieced themselves back together into something new, a family. Imperfect and scarred, but real and whole, and theirs. And in that small house in Montana Territory, as a father taught his daughter to make biscuits and told her stories about the sister she'd never met, two broken lives became one beautiful thing, complete.